Struggling single dad helped a hitchhiker with no ID, only to learn. She walked away from a fortune. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, cutting through the wild, untamed landscape of Colorado. The stars above shimmered like distant promises, but to Eleanor Hayes, they felt like ghosts of a life she had left behind. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, the weight of her past pressing against her chest. She had spent years building an empire, climbing to the top of a corporate world that never truly felt like home. And then, one day, she did the unthinkable. She walked away. Now she was just Ellie, a woman with a broken-down car on a deserted road, with no ID, no destination, and no plan. And when a struggling single dad pulled over to help her, neither of them knew their lives were about to change forever. A story about second chances, love found in unexpected places, and the magic of starting over. But before we dive into this heartwarming journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story that warms your heart and reminds you of the power of love, kindness, and fate. Now let's begin. Her true home. The night was vast, an endless stretch of dark sky peppered with cold, indifferent stars. The winding highway cut through the Colorado landscape like a ribbon of solitude, flanked by towering pines and silent hills. Eleanor Hayes gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white as she fought back the ache settling deep in her chest. The dashboard glowed faintly, casting an eerie blue light on her face, but she barely noticed. Her mind was a storm. Memories, clashing against each other, a whirlwind of regret and relief. She had left. For the first time in 15 years, Eleanor Hayes was no longer the CEO of Hayes & Carter Properties. She wasn't the woman who sealed billion-dollar deals, the face-gracing business magazines, or the architect of luxury developments spanning the country. She was just Ellie now, a woman with a backpack, a handful of cash, and no real plan, except to disappear. But running wasn't the end. It couldn't be. As she rounded a curve, the car gave a violent shudder. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then died altogether. No, not now. Ellie pulled over onto the shoulder, her heart pounding as she hit the hazard lights. She exhaled, her breath visible in the cool night air. Popping the hood, she stepped out, immediately feeling the sharp chill bite through her thin sweater. The smell of pine and damp earth filled her senses, grounding her in the stark reality of her situation. She had no idea how to fix a car. She could negotiate high-stakes contracts, read market trends, and navigate hostile boardrooms. But this, a broken-down car on a desolate road in the middle of nowhere, she was utterly useless. She pulled out her phone, but of course, no signal. Ellie closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Maybe this was fate's way of forcing her to stop running. Maybe. The sudden beam of headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating her like a startled deer. She shielded her eyes as an old blue pickup truck slowed down and pulled over a few feet ahead. Her muscles tensed. She had spent years in a world where trust was a liability. People always wanted something. Deals were never just deals. Kindness was rarely without motive. The driver's side door creaked open and a tall man stepped out. Car trouble. His voice was deep, carrying the easy confidence of someone used to handling problems. Ellie studied him warily. He was rugged, with broad shoulders and calloused hands, the kind of man who looked like he belonged to the land, not a boardroom. His jeans were worn but clean, and his flannel shirt hung loosely over a grey t-shirt. In the dim glow of his truck's headlights, she could see a few streaks of grease on his fingers. Mechanic, maybe. Yeah, she answered cautiously. It just stopped. The man stepped forward, peering under the hood. Mind if I take a look? Ellie hesitated. Then again, what choice did she have? Freezing to death wasn't exactly a preferable alternative. Be my guest, she said, stepping back. The man bent over the engine, his movements sure and practiced. After a moment he let out a low whistle. Looks like your alternator's shot. Battery's dead too. Ellie didn't need to understand cars to know that was bad news. Great, she muttered under her breath. The man straightened, wiping his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. I can give you a ride into town. It's about 10 miles from here. Closest mechanic won't be open until morning, though. Ellie hesitated again. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to stay alone, to figure this out herself. But she wasn't that woman anymore, the woman who had to be in control at all times. She was starting over, and that meant trusting people even just a little. All right, she finally said. Thanks. The man nodded and walked to his truck. She grabbed her backpack from the car, slinging it over her shoulder before climbing into the passenger seat. The truck smelled like leather and coffee, the radio playing softly, some country song she didn't recognize. You from around here? The man asked as he pulled back onto the road. Ellie shook her head. Just passing through. He glanced at her, then back at the road. Name's Daniel, by the way. Daniel Miller. She hesitated before answering. It was a strange feeling, introducing herself as just Ellie. No corporate title, no weight of expectation behind it. Just a name. Ellie, she said. Just Ellie. Daniel nodded, as if that was enough. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Ellie found herself staring out the window, watching the trees blur past under the moonlight. It had been so long since she'd been in a place this quiet. No honking taxis, no endless streams of notifications, no flashing stock tickers. Just the rhythmic hum of tires against pavement. She exhaled. Maybe this wasn't such a bad thing after all. After a few minutes, Daniel spoke again. Where you headed? I don't know, she admitted. Daniel glanced at her again, this time with more curiosity. You running from something? Ellie's grip tightened around the straps of her backpack. Not something, someone. Daniel didn't pry. Instead, he simply nodded, eyes back on the road. Well, wherever you're going, you'll be safe in town for tonight. Ellie wasn't sure if anywhere was safe for her anymore, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. The truck rumbled down the empty road, heading toward a town that she didn't know would change her life forever. The town of Willow Creek unfolded before Ellie like a painting, rustic, peaceful, untouched by the relentless pace of the world she had left behind. Streetlights cast a soft amber glow over the quiet roads, the storefronts lined with wooden signs, their names hand-painted with care. The quaint charm of the town contrasted starkly with the glittering high-rises she used to navigate. Daniel's truck rolled past a small-town diner, a bookstore with twinkling fairy lights in the window, and a hardware store that looked like it had been there for decades. The sight stirred something deep within her, a nostalgia she couldn't quite place. You ever been to a town like this before? Daniel asked, glancing at her as he slowed the truck near a modest, homey-looking cafe. Ellie hesitated. She had been to places like this, but never as a visitor, only as a developer, someone sent to buy, build, and reshape. To her old self, towns like Willow Creek had been nothing more than opportunities on a map, places waiting to be turned into profitable investments. But standing here now, she realized there was a heartbeat to this place, a rhythm that couldn't be measured in financial reports. No, she finally admitted, not like this. Daniel didn't press further. Instead, he pulled into a parking spot and nodded toward the cafe. Best coffee in town, he said. And I'm not just saying that because I own the place. Ellie raised an eyebrow. You own this cafe? Daniel smirked. I do. But don't let that fool you. I make a terrible latte. Maggie's the real talent around here. As if on cue, the cafe door swung open, and a woman in her 60s stepped out, wiping her hands on a floral apron. Her hair was a halo of soft grey curls, her eyes warm but sharp, the kind of gaze that saw through people faster than they could put up walls. Daniel Miller "What on earth are you doing bringing home strays at this hour?" she called, hands on her hips. Ellie stiffened. Did she look that desperate, that lost? Daniel chuckled. "Car trouble. She needed a ride into town." Maggie's gaze softened as she turned to Ellie. "Well, that makes more sense. You poor thing, you must be freezing." Before Ellie could protest, Maggie was already ushering her inside. The cafe was warm, cozy, alive with the scent of cinnamon and fresh brewed coffee. A fire crackled in a brick fireplace near the seating area, and shelves lined the walls, filled with old books, ceramic mugs, and little trinkets that gave the place character. A chalkboard menu listed items in neat cursive, and Ellie couldn't help but smile at the handwritten note underneath. "If you're looking for fast, go elsewhere. Good things take time." She had spent years in a world where everything was about speed. Fast money, fast deals, fast results. Sitting in this cafe, she suddenly wondered how much of her life she had spent rushing toward a future she wasn't even sure she wanted. Maggie reappeared with a steaming cup of cocoa instead of coffee. "You look like someone who could use something comforting," she said with a wink. Ellie hesitated, then took the cup. It was silly, really. Accepting a cup of cocoa shouldn't feel like such a big deal, but after years of carefully negotiating every interaction, calculating every decision, this simple act of kindness felt foreign. She took a sip. It was perfect. "So, Ellie," Maggie said, sliding into the seat across from her, "are you staying in town long?" Ellie opened her mouth to say no, that she'd be gone by morning. But the words didn't come. "I don't know," she admitted instead. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You got a place to stay?" Ellie hesitated again. The motel she had seen on the way in looked questionable at best, and with her car out of commission, she wasn't exactly swimming in options. Maggie must have seen her uncertainty because she patted Ellie's hand. "We've got a room upstairs. It's small, but it's clean. You can stay there for a few nights until you figure things out." Ellie blinked. Thank you, but I can pay." Maggie waved her off. "You can help around the cafe if it makes you feel better. Lord knows I could use an extra set of hands." Work. The word hit her like a challenge. It had been years since she had done anything with her own hands that wasn't signing contracts. Could she do this? More importantly, did she want to? She looked at Daniel, who simply shrugged. "Better than waiting at a motel for your car to get fixed." Ellie exhaled. "All right, just for a few days." Maggie grinned. "Good. Now finish that cocoa before it gets cold." That night, as Ellie lay in the tiny but charming room above the cafe, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the town below. No city sirens, no endless emails, no calls from shareholders demanding her attention. For the first time in years, she wasn't needed by anyone, and for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if that was terrifying or freeing. She turned onto her side, her backpack still at the foot of the bed, its contents a reminder of the life she left behind. Inside was her wallet, with an ID she no longer wanted to be attached to, a phone she had turned off, and a bank card she had barely used since leaving. In the morning, she would have to wake up and help run a cafe. She had no idea how to do that. But maybe learning wouldn't be so bad. Outside, the town of Willow Creek slept, unaware that the woman who had come in from the cold would never be the same again. The morning light streamed through the lace curtains of Ellie's small room above the cafe, casting a golden glow across the wooden floor. She blinked awake, momentarily disoriented. The mattress beneath her wasn't the Egyptian cotton luxury she'd grown used to. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and warm cinnamon, a stark contrast to the sterile, scentless mornings she had in her penthouse apartment. Then she remembered. Willow Creek, Maggie, the cafe, the promise she had made. She sat up, running a hand through her hair, suddenly second-guessing her decision. Did she really agree to work here? The idea was absurd. She had spent her life running a multi-billion-dollar company, not taking orders behind a cafe counter. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Ellie, sweetheart, time to get up," Maggie's warm voice called. "Coffee's fresh and we open in 30 minutes, Ellie exhaled, rubbing her temples. No backing out now. Downstairs, the cafe was already coming to life. Daniel stood behind the counter, rolling up his sleeves as he ground coffee beans. A few early regulars sat at the small wooden tables, sipping their morning brew and chatting. In the unhurried, familiar rhythm that small towns seemed to move in, Maggie handed Ellie an apron, the fabric soft and well-worn. "It's nothing fancy, just help out where you can. You ever work in a cafe before?" Ellie hesitated. How did one admit that they had never actually worked a real job? "Not exactly," she said carefully. Daniel looked up from where he was, pouring steamed milk into a cup. "Figured, try not to spill anything expensive." Ellie narrowed her eyes at him, catching the teasing smirk that ghosted across his lips. Maggie patted her shoulder. "Don't mind him. Everyone learns somewhere. Start by taking orders, and if you survive that, we'll teach you the register." Ellie nodded, rolling up the sleeves of the oversized sweater she had borrowed from Maggie's spare closet. How hard could it be? As it turned out, taking orders was a disaster. "Can I get a half-calf oat milk latte with an extra shot of espresso and sugar-free vanilla?" Ellie blinked. "A what?" The woman, mid-50s, with reading glasses perched on her nose, repeated the order, slower this time, as if Ellie might be hard of hearing. Ellie grabbed a notepad and tried to translate the coffee jargon into something she could relay to Daniel. When she handed it to him, he glanced at the scribbled mess and snorted. "Did you just write complicated milk coffee?" Ellie scowled. "It's close enough." Not even remotely. The first hour was pure chaos. She forgot to ask people if they wanted cream, accidentally handed a black coffee to someone who had ordered tea, and at one point nearly dropped an entire tray of muffins. "All right, newbie," Daniel finally said, after watching her struggle with the register for 5 minutes. "Step aside before you bankrupt the place." Ellie threw up her hands. "It's not my fault this thing still runs on ancient technology." Maggie laughed from across the room. "It's a cash register, not the stock market, dear." Ellie exhaled in frustration, but a small part of her, deep down, felt something she hadn't in a long time. She was learning. Failing, but learning. Midway through the morning, as Ellie attempted to master pouring coffee without spilling it everywhere, a small voice interrupted her concentration. "Are you new?" Ellie turned to see a girl no older than 10, her curly brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail, a book tucked under her arm. "Yes," Ellie said cautiously. The girl studied her for a moment, as if deciding whether or not she was trustworthy. Then she smiled. "I like you." Ellie blinked. "You do?" "Yeah. You're funny." "I wasn't trying to be." "Still funny." Ellie let out a soft chuckle, the tension in her shoulders easing just a bit. "And you are?" "Lily," the girl said proudly, holding out her hand as if she were a miniature businesswoman. Ellie shook it, amused. "Nice to meet you, Lily. I'm Daniel's daughter." Ellie's smile faltered. Daniel's daughter. She hadn't expected that. She stole a glance at him behind the counter, where he was pretending not to listen but clearly was. "Did my dad tell you about my mom?" Lily asked suddenly, her tone casual but her eyes searching. Ellie hesitated. "No." Lily nodded, as if that answer made sense to her. "She passed away a few years ago. Cancer." Ellie wasn't sure how to respond to that. What could she say that wouldn't sound like empty sympathy? "I'm sorry," she said finally. "That must have been really hard." Lily shrugged, but there was a heaviness in the way she did it. "Yeah, but we're okay. Dad says we're tougher than we look." Ellie smiled, surprising herself with how genuine it felt. "I believe that." Lily beamed, then pulled a small, heart-shaped locket from around her neck. "She gave me this. I always wear it." Ellie recognized that kind of attachment. She had never been sentimental, But after leaving her old life behind, she had kept one thing, a watch that had belonged to her mother, one of the only people who had ever truly believed in her. Before she could say anything more, Lily brightened. "Hey, want to see something cool?" Ellie wasn't sure what to expect, but before she could respond, Lily grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back door of the cafe, leading her outside. The back of the cafe opened into a small garden, space lined with fairy lights and a wooden swing set. There were raised garden beds where fresh herbs grew, basil, rosemary, thyme. "My mum started this," Lily said, climbing onto the swing. "She said a cafe should feel like home, so she made a garden where people could sit and feel like they belonged." Ellie looked around, taking it all in. This was more than just a cafe. It was a place built on love, on community, on something real. And suddenly the idea of just staying a few days didn't seem like enough. The rhythm of Willow Creek had started to seep into Ellie's bones. She hadn't expected it. This subtle unraveling of the life she once knew, replaced by something slower, something quieter. She still fumbled her way through her shifts at the cafe, still struggled with remembering regular customers' usual orders, and still felt out of place every time she picked up a coffee pot. But she was starting to learn. Maggie had taken her under her wing, teaching her how to bake scones. From scratch, how to fold napkins just right, how to pour a cappuccino without making a disaster of the foam. Ellie found herself waking up each morning without dreading the day ahead, without the familiar weight of profit margins and boardroom battles pressing down on her chest. And then there was Lily. The little girl had become Ellie's unexpected shadow, a whirlwind of curiosity and boundless energy, always dragging her outside to see something new. An old book she had found, a bird's nest tucked into the cafe's garden trellis, a letter she had written to her mother, but never sent. It was dangerous. How quickly Ellie had started feeling something again, something like belonging, and that terrified her. The bell above the cafe door jingled as Ellie wiped down the counter, her back turned to the entrance. "I'll be right with you," she called over her shoulder, expecting a regular, but then she heard it, a voice she hadn't expected to hear again. Well, here you are." Ellie froze mid-motion, her breath catching. She turned slowly, her stomach twisting into a tight knot. Standing in the doorway, looking entirely out of place in this cozy, rustic cafe, was Jonathan Reed, her former advisor, her closest confidant, in the corporate world, and the one person she knew would eventually find her. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, his polished leather shoes a stark contrast to the wooden floors and the smell of fresh-baked muffins that filled the air. He hadn't changed, not really. The sharp eyes, the unreadable expression, the way he took in every detail of his surroundings as if calculating how to turn it into an advantage. Ellie swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Jonathan's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Neither should you." Maggie glanced between them, immediately sensing the tension. Without a word, she wiped her hands on her apron and gave Ellie a knowing nod. "Take your time, dear. I'll handle things here." Ellie forced herself to move, leading Jonathan toward a small booth in the back corner of the cafe. She slid into the seat across from him, her arms folding instinctively across her chest, a defensive stance. Jonathan leaned back, studying her. "You know, I had to dig to find you." "I didn't want to be found," she shot back. He let out a dry chuckle. "Clearly," he gestured around them. "A small-town cafe in the middle of nowhere, Ellie? Really? Is this some kind of existential crisis, or are you just playing at being normal?" Ellie's jaw tightened. It was always like this with Jonathan. He had been her right hand for years, guiding her through the corporate battlefield with brutal efficiency and unwavering loyalty, but he had never understood why she left. "No one did. I'm not playing at anything," she said. I'm figuring things out. Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. Listen, I get it. You needed a break. You were burnt out, but disappearing, selling. Off your shares, walking away from everything you built. Ellie, that company is still yours. The board is panicking, your investors are nervous, and if you don't step in soon, they're going to replace you permanently. Ellie shook her head. Let them. Jonathan blinked, clearly taken aback. Are you hearing yourself? You built an empire, you don't just throw that away. She met his gaze, steady this time. Jonathan, do you know what my days looked like back then? Wake up before sunrise, back-to-back meetings, endless phone calls. Every decision I made was about how to make more money, how to expand, how to outmaneuver the competition. I was constantly fighting, constantly strategizing. And for what? She exhaled sharply. I was miserable. Jonathan's expression flickered just for a second. That's the price of success, Ellie, he said, softer this time. You always knew that. She shook her head. Then maybe I don't want that kind of success anymore. Jonathan was silent for a moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. All right, he said slowly. Let's say I believe you. What's next? You gonna stay here forever, make lattes and sweep floors? Ellie hesitated, because the truth was, she didn't know. Before she could answer, Lily appeared out of nowhere, sliding into the booth next to her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Who's this? The little girl asked, eyeing Jonathan suspiciously. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. And who are you? Lily squared her shoulders. Lily Miller. This is my dad's cafe. Jonathan shot Ellie a curious glance, but she didn't elaborate. Lily turned her attention back to him. You don't look like you belong here. Ellie nearly choked on a laugh, but Jonathan merely smirked. Neither does she, he pointed out. Lily frowned, then looked up at Ellie. You're not leaving, are you? The question was so simple, so innocent, yet it landed like a weight in Ellie's chest. Jonathan was watching her now, waiting for her answer. Ellie hesitated. The bell above the door jingled again, and Daniel walked in. His gaze flicked. Between Jonathan, Ellie, and Lily, his expression unreadable. Lily hopped off the seat. Dad, Ellie has a visitor, but I don't like him. Jonathan let out a low chuckle. Charming kid. Ellie felt trapped between two versions of herself, the woman she had been and the woman she was trying to become. Jonathan was right about one thing. She couldn't hide here forever. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she wanted to leave, and she had a feeling that Daniel wasn't going to let this conversation go unanswered. Ellie felt the air in the cafe shift the moment Daniel stepped inside. His presence was grounded, steady, but there was something in his gaze, something questioning, something unreadable, as his eyes flicked between her and Jonathan. Jonathan, ever perceptive, leaned back in the booth with an amused smirk, as if he had already assessed the situation and found it entertaining. Daniel's voice was casual, but there was an edge to it. Didn't know we were expecting guests. Ellie opened her mouth, searching for the right words, but Lily, blunt as always, cut in before she could. He's trying to take Ellie away, she declared. Silence. Ellie let out a sharp breath. Lily, that's not... Jonathan chuckled, entirely unbothered. I like this kid. Daniel, however, did not look amused. His gaze locked onto Ellie's, waiting for an explanation. And suddenly she realized something. She owed him one. Not because they were anything more than two people thrown into each other's lives by circumstance. Not because she had any real obligation to explain herself, but because for the first time in years, someone had given her the chance to just be, and he deserved the truth. She exhaled. Jonathan is an old friend. He worked with me for years. Daniel studied her for a beat, then shifted his attention to Jonathan. Worked with you how? Jonathan, to his credit, looked delighted by the interrogation. She was my boss, CEO of one of the largest real estate firms in the country. Maybe you've heard of it, Hayes and Carter Properties? Daniel's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Of course he had heard of it. Most people had. Ellie braced herself, waiting for the reaction she had seen a dozen times before, the assumptions, the judgment, the shift in how people treated her the moment they realized who she was. But Daniel didn't look impressed, or awed, or intimidated. He looked disappointed. "You lied," he said simply. Ellie felt the words like a punch to the gut. "No," she said quickly. "I never lied. She hesitated. "I just didn't tell you." Daniel let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "That's the same thing, Ellie." She hated how much that stung. Lily, sensing the shift in energy, tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Dad?" He looked down at his daughter, his face softening. Then he glanced back at Ellie, his expression unreadable. "Excuse us," he said, then turned to leave, gently guiding Lily toward the door. Ellie wanted to stop him, wanted to explain. But what could she say? She had spent so much time running from her past, and now that it had caught up with her, she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to fight for what she had found here. Jonathan watched Daniel walk out, then turned back to Ellie. "Well, that was dramatic." She shot him a glare. "Jonathan," he held up his hands. "Hey, I'm just saying, you've always been good at complicated exits. This is just another one." Ellie slumped back in her seat, pressing the heels of her hands to her eyes. "I don't want to leave." That was the first time she had said it out loud. Jonathan arched a brow. "That right?" Ellie let her hands drop. "I don't know what I want, but I know I don't want to go back to that." She gestured vaguely in the direction Jonathan had come from, meaning the boardrooms, the business deals, the exhausting cycle of trying to be someone she wasn't sure she even liked. Jonathan studied her for a long moment, then leaned forward. "Ellie, you've always been the smartest person in the room, but for once, I think you're overthinking this," she frowned. "What do you mean?" he smirked. "You keep talking about what you don't want. Maybe it's time to figure out what you do want." And that was the problem, wasn't it? Because, for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure. Ellie spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze. Maggie didn't ask questions, but her knowing glances suggested she had overheard plenty. At one point, Ellie had started wiping down the same counter for the fourth time, prompting Maggie to gently take the rag from her hand and replace it with a warm cup of tea. "You look like someone who spent too much time running in circles," she said. Ellie let out a soft laugh. "I think I have." Maggie smiled knowingly. "Then maybe it's time to stand still for a while." Ellie wanted to, more than she had realized. The sun was setting by the time Ellie gathered enough courage to walk to Daniel's house. She knew where it was. Lily had dragged her there once before, proudly showing off the backyard swing set and the vegetable garden her father had built. The house itself was modest but welcoming, a small wraparound porch, a light still glowing in the window. Ellie hesitated at the doorstep, then forced herself to knock. She expected Daniel to ignore her. Instead, the door opened almost immediately. He didn't look surprised to see her, just tired. She swallowed. "Can we talk?" Daniel crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I don't know, Ellie, can we?" She exhaled. "I should have told you the truth." "Yeah," he agreed. "You should have." Ellie nodded, looking down at her hands. "I didn't because She hesitated. "Because I was afraid you'd treat me differently." Daniel studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "You really don't get it, do you?" Ellie frowned. "Get what?" Daniel sighed. "Ellie, I don't care that you used to be some big-time CEO. I care that you didn't trust me enough to tell me." The words hit deep, cutting through the tangled mess of emotions in her chest. "I do trust you," she whispered. Daniel searched her face, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe her. Finally, he stepped aside, opening the door wider. Then, "Come in," he said, "and let's talk." Ellie stepped inside, and for the first time since she had arrived in Willow Creek, she realized she wanted to stay. Ellie stepped inside Daniel's house, the warmth wrapping around her like an embrace. The space was modest but inviting, filled with the kind of quiet comfort that only came from a home well lived in. A wooden bookshelf lined one wall, filled with well-worn novels. A few framed photos sat on the mantel above the fireplace, Lily as a baby, a younger Daniel laughing with a woman Ellie assumed had been his wife. She swallowed hard. This wasn't just a house. It was a home. Daniel gestured toward the kitchen table. "You want some coffee?" Ellie hesitated before nodding. "Sure." Daniel moved toward the coffee maker, his movements unhurried, measured, as if he was giving himself time to decide what to say next. Ellie sat down, fingers tracing an old scratch on the wooden table. The silence stretched between them, not hostile, but thick with things left unsaid. Finally, Daniel spoke. "So, what now?" Ellie looked up. "What do you mean?" He turned, crossing his arms over his chest. "You're a smart woman, Ellie. You didn't just come here to tell me you used to be a CEO. You could have let me stay mad. But you didn't." She let out a slow breath. He was right. She had spent years learning how to negotiate, how to control conversations, how to dictate the outcome of every interaction. But here in this small town, with this man who had seen her not as a businesswoman, but just as Ellie, she didn't want to manipulate this. She wanted to be honest. "I came because I realized something today," she admitted. "I don't want to leave." Daniel's brows lifted slightly, but he said nothing. He just waited. Ellie exhaled. "I told myself this was temporary, that I was just passing through. But then, I don't know, this place, it's different." Daniel leaned against the counter, arms still crossed, his expression unreadable. "And what exactly are you looking for here, Ellie?" She hesitated, because for once she didn't have a calculated answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know I don't want to go back to who I was before." Daniel studied her for a moment, then finally pushed off the counter and poured the coffee into 2 mugs. He slid one across the table toward her before sitting down across from her. "Then, maybe you don't have to," he said simply. Ellie blinked. "What?" Daniel shrugged. "Who says you have to know exactly what's next? Maybe you just stay. Figure it out as you go." Ellie let out a short laugh. "You make it sound easy." Daniel smirked. "It's not. But not everything has to be complicated either." The next morning, Ellie woke up feeling something she hadn't in a long time. Light. There was no pressing urgency, no back-to-back meetings, no emails demanding immediate responses. Instead, there was the scent of freshly brewed coffee and vanilla, the distant hum of small-town life stirring awake outside. For the first time in her life, she wasn't racing against the clock. She got ready and walked to the cafe, where Maggie was already prepping for the morning rush. The older woman took one look at her and smiled knowingly. "Well, you look like someone who's finally made a decision." Ellie let out a soft chuckle. "I guess I have." Maggie handed her an apron. "Good, because I have a dozen cinnamon rolls in the oven and exactly 0 extra hands." Ellie laughed and got to work. By mid-morning, the cafe was buzzing with life. Ellie had finally started remembering regular customers' names, taking their orders without hesitation, even managing to work the ancient cash register without disaster. And then, the test came. A group of well-dressed men and women walked, in their presence immediately setting Ellie on edge. She recognized the type: investors, developers, people from her old world. She braced herself as one of them, a man in his 50s with slicked-back hair and a too-polished demeanor, approached the counter. Well, he mused, scanning the menu board. "What an interesting little place. You must be new here." Ellie forced a polite smile. "Can I get you something?" The man smirked. Straight to business. I like that. He glanced around before lowering his voice. Actually, I was hoping to speak with the owner. Ellie stiffened. About what? He flashed a business card, a development firm. We're looking into investment opportunities in this area. We think this town has a lot of potential. And this cafe, it's in a prime location. Ellie's grip on the counter tightened. She knew this game, knew how men like this swooped into small towns, buying out businesses, turning local landmarks into commercialized chains. And worst of all, she had been one of them. Maggie approached, drying her hands on a towel. Can I help you with something? The man smiled, slick and confident. I was just talking to your employee here about a business opportunity. Maggie's gaze flicked to Ellie, her expression unreadable. Then, with the same quiet confidence she always carried, she simply said, Not interested. The man's smile faltered. I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly, Maggie interrupted. And I've seen your kind before. You don't want to help this town. You want to change it, and not for the better. Ellie held her breath, waiting for the pushback, the arguments she had so often used herself in boardrooms. But the man just chuckled, slipping his business card onto the counter. Things change, Mom. Sooner or later you'll see that. And with that he turned and left, his group trailing behind him. Ellie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Maggie picked up the business card and tore it in half. Damn vultures! Ellie blinked. You're not even going to consider their offer? Maggie gave her a look. Would you? Ellie thought about it, about the old her, the version of herself that would have immediately seen the numbers, the opportunity, the financial gain, but that wasn't her anymore. So instead she shook her head. No, she admitted. I wouldn't. Maggie smiled, patting her shoulder. That's what I thought. And for the first time, Ellie felt completely sure about where she belonged. The wind had picked up in Willow Creek, carrying with it the crisp scent of pine and autumn leaves. Ellie stood outside the cafe just before sunrise, holding a steaming cup of coffee, watching as the small town stirred awake. For the first time in years, she felt awake too. A week had passed since she told Daniel she didn't want to leave. A week since she'd faced the investors from her old world, seeing them not as colleagues, but as intruders into a life she was learning to love. And yet, something still felt unfinished. She saw Daniel walking toward the cafe, his hands in the pockets of his flannel jacket, his expression unreadable. They had settled into an unspoken truce since that night at his house. He hadn't pushed her for answers, and she hadn't forced explanations, but the distance between them still lingered. Morning, he said as he approached. Morning, she replied, offering him her extra cup of coffee. He hesitated, then took it. You bribing me? She smirked. Would it work? Daniel took a slow sip, then met her gaze. Depends on what you're after. Ellie exhaled. Time to be honest. I don't want things to be weird between us, she admitted. I know I should have told you the truth earlier. I should have trusted you. Daniel studied her for a long moment before responding. I wasn't upset about who you used to be, Ellie. She frowned. Then what? I was upset because you thought I'd see you differently, he said simply. Like I'd only care if you were just some hitchhiker and not someone who used to run a multi-billion-dollar company. Ellie's chest tightened. Because he was right. She had spent her entire life earning people's respect through status, power, and success. And here was a man who had respected her just for being her, before he even knew the truth. I'm sorry, she said softly. Daniel nodded, then took another sip of coffee. Good, she blinked. That's it, he smirked. What, you want me to make you suffer a little more? Ellie rolled her eyes, but relief flooded through her. Maybe. Things between them weren't broken. Maybe they were just figuring it out. Later that day, Ellie was behind the counter when the investors came back. The same man from before, the one with the slicked back hair and the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no in his life, strolled into the cafe like he owned the place. Ellie stiffened. Maggie, standing beside her, muttered under her breath, "These people are like a bad cold. They just keep coming back." Ellie took a breath, preparing herself as the man leaned against the counter with a practiced, easy smile. "Miss Hayes," he said smoothly, "I was hoping we could chat privately this time." Ellie forced a polite smile. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." His smirk faltered slightly. "All right then." He set down a folder on the counter and slid it toward her. An official offer. Ellie opened it, glancing over the numbers that should have once made her heart race with excitement. The amount was obscene, more than Maggie's cafe and most of the businesses in town were worth combined. She shut the folder. "No," the investor sighed. "I don't think you understand the scope of what we're offering. This isn't just about a cafe, Miss Hayes. It's about expansion, modernization, progress." Ellie leaned forward. "And I don't think you understand what this town is. It doesn't need expansion. It doesn't need progress in the way you define it. It needs to be left alone." He let out a short laugh. "You sound like one of them." Ellie smiled. "Good." The man's eyes darkened slightly, and for the first time his mask of calculated charm cracked. "That's unfortunate." Ellie didn't flinch. "For you, maybe." The man studied her for a long moment before shaking his head. "You can't hide out here forever, Miss Hayes." She smiled, something steady and unshakable settling in her chest. "I'm not hiding." He left, muttering something under his breath, and the cafe doors swung shut behind him. Maggie let out a low whistle. "Well, damn, that was satisfying." Ellie laughed, her shoulders loosening. Yes, it was." That evening, as Ellie wiped down the cafe's tables, Daniel appeared in the doorway. She glanced up, smiling softly. "Hey!" He walked over, leaning against the counter. "Heard you told those developers to take a hike." Ellie smirked. "Word travels fast." He nodded. "You're really staying, huh?" She set the rag down, meeting his gaze head-on. "Yeah, I think I am." Daniel studied her, then let out a small chuckle. "You know, for someone who didn't know how to take an order 2 weeks ago, you're getting pretty good at this." Ellie rolled her eyes. "I'll take that as a compliment." He hesitated, then said, "Look, I know you're figuring things out, and I know you don't need anyone to tell you what to do, but if you ever want help, with starting over, you don't have to do it alone." Ellie's breath hitched slightly because she realized something in that moment, something terrifying and wonderful all at once. She wasn't just staying in Willow Creek, she was starting to belong, and for the first time in a long time, she wanted to build something real with people who mattered, with someone who mattered. She nodded, a smile curving her lips. "I think I'd like that." Daniel smiled back, and just like that, the future didn't feel so uncertain anymore. The sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting golden hues across the rooftops, painting the streets in warm amber. The town moved at its usual, unhurried rhythm, a stark contrast to the life Ellie had once known. And yet it no longer felt foreign. To her, it felt like home. She had spent the past few days settling deeper into her new reality, taking orders at the cafe, learning how to balance trays without disaster, even perfecting Maggie's cinnamon scone recipe. It was strange, really. The work was mundane, messy, imperfect, and yet it was hers. But even as she grew comfortable, a part of her knew choosing to stay was only the first step. Now she had to figure out what staying meant. Ellie sat at the counter that evening, studying the cafe's books, something Maggie had casually mentioned she never quite kept track of properly. Maggie had laughed it off, saying, "As long as the register isn't empty at the end of the day, I call it a win." But Ellie knew the cafe was struggling. The numbers weren't disastrous, but they weren't sustainable either. With a little planning, a little restructuring, it could be so much more. She grinned to herself. Maybe she wasn't entirely done being a businesswoman after all. Tell me you're not working. Ellie looked up to see Daniel leaning against the counter, arms crossed, his usual smirk firmly in place. It's not work, she defended, tapping the papers in front of her. It's, organizing. Daniel chuckled. Same thing. She shrugged. Maggie's great at running this place, but let's just say bookkeeping isn't her strong suit. Daniel leaned closer, glancing at the numbers. And what are you planning to do about it? Ellie hesitated, then set the papers down. I don't know yet, but I do know this place could be even better. A few small changes, maybe an expanded menu, better supply chain management, some marketing. Daniel raised a brow. Marketing? Ellie smirked. Yes, Daniel, even small-town cafes can use marketing. He shook his head, amused. You really can't turn it off, can you? Ellie's smirk softened. Turns out I don't have to. I just have to use it differently. And that was the truth of it, wasn't it? She didn't have to erase the woman she used to be. She just had to figure out how she fit into this new world. Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the door. Come on, Ellie frowned. Where? You'll see. Daniel led her outside, and the night air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of pine and wood smoke. They walked in comfortable silence, past the bookstore, past the post office, past the places Ellie had memorized over the past few weeks. Finally, they reached the town square, where a few local vendors were packing up from the weekly farmers' market. Ellie tilted her head. Why are we here? Daniel gestured toward the market stalls. You said the cafe could be more, so let's start with this, she blinked. You think I should sell coffee at the farmers' market? Daniel shrugged. Why not? People come here every weekend. Maggie's got great coffee. You want to bring in more customers? Start here. Ellie considered it. It wasn't the kind of expansion she was used to. There were no skyscrapers, no massive acquisitions, no high-stakes negotiations, but it was smart. It was sustainable. It was exactly what the cafe needed. She turned to Daniel, a slow smile forming. You know, for a guy who claims he's not a businessman, you're pretty good at this. Daniel smirked. Don't get used to it. Ellie chuckled, but inside, something shifted. Maybe success didn't have to be about bigger, faster, more. Maybe it could be about steady, meaningful enough. The next morning, Ellie pitched the idea to Maggie. To her surprise, the older woman didn't hesitate. I think it's brilliant, Maggie said, wiping flour off her hands. Why didn't I think of it? Ellie grinned. Because you were busy making the best coffee in town. Maggie beamed. Flattery will get you everywhere, dear. Within an hour, they had a plan, a coffee stall at the farmer's market, featuring Maggie's best blends and a selection of pastries. By afternoon, Ellie had already begun organizing. A proper schedule, making phone calls to suppliers, even convincing the local print shop owner to make promotional flyers. It was work, yes, but it was different this time. It wasn't about power. It was about purpose, and for the first time in her life she felt fulfilled by something other than ambition. That evening, as Ellie sat on the cafe's porch, watching the last of the sunlight fade into deep indigo, she heard footsteps behind her. She glanced up to find Daniel, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, watching her. You know, he said, settling onto the step beside her, I think you're actually happy here. Ellie exhaled, watching the way the stars started to blink to life in the sky. I think I am too, she admitted. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then asked, So, what's next? Ellie glanced at him, and for the first time in forever, she didn't feel the need to have an answer. Instead, she smiled. I guess. I figure it out as I go. Daniel chuckled. Now that's a first. Ellie nudged his arm with her elbow. Shut up. He smirked but didn't move away, and as they sat there under the blanket of a small-town night, Ellie realized she wasn't just staying in Willow Creek. She was building something real, something that mattered, something that, for the first time in a long time, felt like home. The first morning of the Willow Creek Farmers Market coffee stand felt like the beginning of something bigger than just a business idea. Ellie stood behind the wooden stall, the crisp morning air swirling with the rich scent of fresh brewed coffee and warm pastries. Around her, the marketplace buzzed with life. Vendors selling homemade jams, fresh produce and handcrafted goods, families strolling by with children clutching paper bags full of treats, and elderly couples sipping their morning coffee as they took in the slow rhythm of small-town life. And right in the center of it all was Maggie's Cafe, now reaching more people than ever. Ellie handed a cup of coffee to a customer, the steam curling between them like a silent promise. "Never thought I'd see the day," Maggie said beside her, watching the steady line of customers. "You, working a farmer's market stand?" Ellie smirked. "Neither did I." But she wasn't just working it, she had built it. And as the morning wore on, as more people stopped by, complimenting the quality, asking if the cafe had delivery, requesting extra bags of beans to take home, Ellie saw what this could become. It wasn't just about selling coffee, it was about growing roots. But just as she was starting to feel secure in this new life, reality came knocking. Ellie was just finishing an order when she spotted him, Jonathan, standing near the entrance of the market, his suit looking as out of place as ever among the locals in their jeans and flannel jackets. Her stomach clenched. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't ready. Daniel, who had been helping with deliveries, followed her gaze and stiffened. "You want me to make him leave?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp, protective. Ellie forced herself to take a deep breath. "No, I'll handle it." She stepped away from the stall, walking toward Jonathan, her boots crunching against the gravel path. His expression was unreadable as she approached. "You really are staying, then?" Ellie crossed her arms. "What are you doing here, Jonathan?" He sighed, pulling out a manila envelope. "I came to give you one last chance." Ellie's jaw tightened. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. "Board is moving forward with the decision," Jonathan said. "They want to officially remove you from the company. If you come back now, you can still reclaim your seat." Ellie swallowed hard. For years she had fought for that seat, clawed her way to the top, sacrificed more than she cared to admit, and now she was about to lose it for good. Jonathan studied her. "Ellie, don't you miss it, did she?" She thought about the late nights, the high-stakes meetings, the power that came with being at the top, and then she thought about Lily, pulling her into the cafe garden to show her a newly bloomed flower. She thought about Maggie's warm laughter, Daniel's steady presence, the way the smell of cinnamon and coffee filled her lungs every morning. And for the first time, she knew the answer. "No," she said, voice steady, "I don't." Jonathan blinked, genuinely surprised. "Ellie, I'm not coming back, Jonathan." For a long moment he just stared at her. Then finally he nodded. "I guess that's it then," he said, tucking the envelope back into his jacket. "You're really choosing this place?" Ellie glanced over her shoulder, at the cafe stand, at the line of customers, at Daniel, watching her carefully. From a distance, she turned back to Jonathan and smiled. "Yes, I am." Jonathan exhaled, shaking his head with something that looked almost like admiration. "Never thought I'd see the day," he murmured. Then, with one last glance around the market, he gave her a small nod. "Good luck, Ellie." And just like that, he turned and walked away. Ellie let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was done. She was free. When Ellie returned to the stand, Daniel didn't say anything right away. Instead, he handed her a fresh cup of coffee. She took it, savoring the warmth. "Aren't you going to ask what that was about?" Daniel shrugged. "Don't need to. You didn't leave. That tells me everything." Ellie smiled, something warm settling in her chest. He was right. She had made her choice, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't looking back. That evening, After the market had closed and the cafe had been cleaned up, Daniel showed up at Ellie's doorstep. "Come with me," he said. Ellie raised a brow. "That's awfully mysterious." Daniel just smirked and held out his hand. She hesitated only for a moment before taking it. He led her through the quiet town, down a path lined with fireflies that danced in the cool evening air, past the familiar storefronts that had become part of her world, and then finally he stopped at the edge of a lake. Ellie let out a breath. The water reflected the stars, the rippling surface like glass painted with light. Daniel turned to her. "You ever stop to just be?" Ellie frowned. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the lake. "You're always thinking, always planning. Even now you're probably calculating something in your head." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped, because he was right. Daniel shook his head, smiling. "Just take it in, Ellie. No thinking, no planning, just be." Ellie inhaled deeply, the cool night air filling her lungs, and for the first time in a long, long time, she did. She let herself just exist in this moment, with Daniel standing beside her, the lake stretching wide before them, and the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Daniel glanced at her, his voice low. "You really are staying, aren't you?" Ellie met his gaze, her heart steady. "Yes," she whispered. "I really am." Daniel studied her for a beat. Then, softly, carefully, as if giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in. Ellie didn't pull away, and as his lips brushed against hers, gentle and unhurried, she knew this was home. The morning after the kiss by the lake, Ellie woke up to a different kind of quiet. Not the kind that came from loneliness, but the kind that came from belonging. For the first time in years, she didn't wake up with a list of meetings running through her head. No pressing deadlines, no overwhelming responsibilities weighing her down. Instead, she woke up to the soft hum of Willow Creek, the distant laughter of children on their way to school, the warm scent of Maggie's cinnamon rolls wafting through the air, the peaceful rhythm of a town that had accepted her as one of their own, and, for the first time in her life, she felt completely at peace. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of purpose and joy. The coffee stand at the farmer's market became a massive success. More people than ever started visiting Maggie's cafe, eager to try the pastries they had sampled at the market. Ellie used her old business instincts in a new way, creating partnerships with local vendors, sourcing fresh ingredients from nearby farms, even designing a simple but beautiful website to help attract more customers. It wasn't about profits, it was about building something real, something that mattered, and people noticed. One evening, after the cafe had closed, Ellie was sitting by the counter filling out supply orders when she felt a presence beside her. Daniel leaned against the counter, watching her with that slow, thoughtful expression he always had when he was figuring her out. "You know," he said, smirking, "for someone who left $1 billion company behind, you sure spend a lot of time managing inventory." Ellie laughed, shaking her head. "I guess old habits die hard." Daniel studied her for a moment. Then, without warning, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Ellie's breath hitched. "I like this version of you," he said softly. Ellie swallowed, her heart hammering. "Which version is that?" Daniel shrugged. "The one that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. The one that's just here." Ellie felt something deep and unshakable settle in her chest. She had spent her whole life trying to earn respect, success, love, always chasing something just out of reach. But here, in this quiet town, with this man, she didn't have to chase anything. She had already found it. One afternoon, as Ellie wiped down the cafe tables, Maggie slid an envelope across the counter toward her. Ellie frowned, picking it up. "What's this?" Maggie just smiled. "Open it." Ellie hesitated, then pulled out the legal documents inside. Her breath caught. The deed to the cafe. Ellie looked up, her heart pounding. "Maggie, What is this? Maggie folded her arms, her gaze warm but firm. I'm retiring, dear, and I want the cafe to go to someone who loves it as much as I do. Ellie's eyes widened. Wait, you're giving it to me? Maggie chuckled. Not giving, selling, but at a price you and I both know is a steal. Ellie's heart raced. I don't know what to say. Maggie squeezed her hand. Say yes. Ellie thought of her old life, of boardrooms, contracts, ruthless negotiations, and then she thought of this cafe, of the people who had become family, of the place that had given her a second chance. She exhaled, a slow smile spreading across her face. Yes. That evening, after telling Daniel the news, they walked to the lake again, just like the night he had first kissed her. The stars were bright, reflecting on the water like tiny lanterns, guiding her forward. You're really doing this, Daniel said, watching her. Buying the cafe. Ellie nodded. I am, Daniel smiled. You're not just staying in town, Ellie. You're making it yours. Ellie turned to him, 1,000 emotions running through her. This place saved me, Daniel. Daniel's gaze softened. I think you saved yourself. Ellie exhaled. Maybe. She paused, then smirked. But it helped that a grumpy single dad gave me a ride when my car broke down. Daniel let out a laugh. Grumpy? Ellie grinned. A little? Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. Then, before she could say another word, he pulled her close. His arms warm and steady around her. Ellie leaned into him, breathing him in, feeling like she had finally found the thing she didn't even know she had been looking for. Home. Not a place, a person. The Willow Creek Cafe was thriving. Under Ellie's ownership, it had become a staple of the town, a place where people gathered, where memories were made, where strangers became family, and on the cafe walls, framed near the register, was a single newspaper clipping. An article from a major business magazine, detailing Ellie Hayes's shocking departure from corporate life and her unexpected reinvention in a small-town cafe. Ellie had laughed when Jonathan had mailed it to her, but she had framed it anyway, because it was a reminder that she had chosen this life and that she had never been happier. As she wiped down the counter one morning, Lily ran in, her backpack slung over her shoulder. Ellie, can you braid my hair before school? Ellie grinned. Of course, kiddo. As she pulled Lily's curls into a quick braid, Daniel appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching them with that look, the one that always made her heart stumble. You're really part of the family now, huh? He mused. Ellie finished the braid, tying it off with a ribbon, then smirked at him. Oh, I run this family, she teased. Daniel chuckled, walking over and pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her temple. And as Ellie stood there in the cafe, she had built with the people she loved, she knew. She had finally found her true home. Wow, what a journey. From a woman running from her past to a woman who finally found her true home, Ellie's story is a testament to the power of second chances, love, and the courage to start over. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you from a small town like Willow Creek, or do you come from a big city like Ellie's old life? Drop a comment below. I'd love to know where our amazing community is tuning in from. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another inspiring story about love, kindness, and the magic of unexpected connections. Your support means the world, and every like, comment, and share helps bring more heartwarming stories to people just like you. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing in the power of a good story. See you in the next one.